You don't remember being born. No Space Marine does. The memory is taken with the first of the implants, sometime in the long dark of the transformation, and what comes out the other side isn't the child that went in. But every other Space Marine, in every other chapter, can at least be told. A Blood Angel is told of Baal and of Sanguinius, and the red thirst he must master. A Dark Angel is told of Caliban, told some of it anyway, and given a primarch's name to revere and a chapter's history to carry. They are given a shore to stand on. You weren't given a shore. You are a Carcharodon, a warrior of the Carcharodons Astra, and you are aboard a fleet that has no fixed home in the deep void beyond the last Imperial light, in the outer darkness that older texts name with that specific phrase, the outer darkness, the place your ancestors were sent when whatever authority dispatched them decided the sending was necessary. Your instructors taught you that. They taught you that when your wandering ancestors were dispatched into the outer dark upon the day of exile, they were given a mandate, and the mandate was this: to ravage the foes of mankind, to harrow them in their places of strength, to set about the traitor, the alien, and the renegade without mercy. That mandate is still running. You are its current instrument. What your instructors didn't begin with, a world. There is no world. A home world now appears in some Imperial records, Uthika, a bureaucratic designation issued as recompense for the chapter's role in the Badab War, the former territory of the Mantis warriors. But Uthika has nothing to do with what you are. It's a document, a grant. The fleet was home before it was issued, and the fleet is home after. Your instructors didn't begin with a primarch's name because the name they would give you isn't certain, and your chapter does not perform certainty it does not possess. They didn't begin with a founding date because the founding is shrouded. That is the word the oldest references use, shrouded, in the mists of long-lost antiquity. They began with the cold. They began with the silence between hulls. They began with the red wake. You weren't raised to know where you come from. You were raised not to need to. And here is the thing the other chapters would never understand. The thing this is all going to be about. It isn't a wound. You don't lie awake grieving the shore you were never given. The not knowing isn't a hole in you. The not knowing is the water you were born in. And for the next 35 minutes, you are going to remember what it is to breathe it. Your home has no sky. This is where you have to start because it's the fact that makes everything else legible. No horizon. No weather that isn't produced by machines. No sense of a surface underfoot that exists for any reason other than the purpose someone designed it for. Outside the hull isn't darkness the way a dark room is dark. It's the specific condition that exists past the last photon. The cold that isn't temperature, but the absence of heat. The silence that isn't quiet, but the absence of medium. You grew up here. It does not bother you. It has never bothered you. The chapter's operational pattern has a designation in Imperial military taxonomy, the nomad predation pattern. Not a crusading fleet, which makes its measured circuit between established stops and returns periodically to a home system. A true nomad force, self-sufficient, unharbored, beholden to nothing except the mandate. Each subfleet operates as a self-contained unit, a shoal, capable of independent action. All companies are battle companies because there is no reason for reserve companies when there is no fixed position to garrison. Every vessel travels with the chapter because it contributes to the hunt. The fleet itself is the visible record of 10 standard millennia. Your vessels are wildly different in design and era of construction. A fact noted by every Imperial officer who has observed the chapter's fleet at close range and found it difficult to explain. The strike cruiser White Maw, flagship of the Third Company, carries Contemptor dreadnoughts whose chassis date to the heresy itself or earlier. The forged ship Adamantius produces weapons and equipment from patterns that some chapters would keep behind glass. The Nicor, your chapter master's battle barge, the fleet's anchor, is simply the oldest continuous presence in the fleet, its own construction history as obscured as the chapter's founding. Nothing gets discarded. Everything gets repaired, modified, kept operational, added to the accumulation. The accumulation has been traveling for 10 standard millennia. That duration appears in Imperial and chapter records both. 10 millennia of service to the Void Father, which is what you call the Emperor.
Not the All-Father, not the God Emperor in his golden iconography.
The Void Father. Because the Void is where you are, and where you have always been, and his mandate extends into it, and you are his instrument within it. Your warriors are gray-clad and pale-faced, and your eyes are as black as the outer dark. The gene seed does this. With time, it also produces denticles, the same structural formation as a shark's skin, rough and harder than ordinary flesh, which develop along the skin of older members of the chapter. Your chief librarian, Tekahurangi, holds the title the Pale Nomad and bears these growths visibly. He has carried them for a long time. You will carry them too, eventually. Your battle brothers are Void Brothers, not informal, the chapter's specific designation for its ordinary warriors, drawn from the same Polynesian-inflected language that shapes your tattoos, your ranking titles, your customs. Your Third Company's commander holds the designation Reaper Prime.
There is a tapu, a strict observance, around war gear and rank, such that a lower-ranked brother can't touch the weapons or equipment of a senior. On a fleet that has been self-sufficient for 10,000 years, without external authority to enforce behavioral norms, this kind of internal discipline isn't ceremony. It's architecture. It's what keeps the fleet coherent across missions that span generations. You know the sounds the hull makes, the particular silence of deep void transit when the fleet runs quiet and every Void Brother is at rest. The hum of the shields when the fleet clusters for approach. The weight of your armor on the deck at slightly less than planetary standard gravity. No planet-born human could navigate your home without a guide. You navigate it without thinking. There are sealed sections. Every vessel of sufficient age has them. Compartments that were locked generations ago, and whose contents weren't documented, or were documented in records that no longer exist. Some of those seals predate the chapter's own institutional memory. Your fleet has carried things for longer than anyone aboard it has been alive. What those things are isn't your current concern. The Void carries what the fleet carries. The mandate runs. Not all of this was given to you at once. The hypno-conditioning that remakes a Carcharodon recruit begins with removal. Whatever you were before, whatever world you were taken from during a red tithe, whatever name your family called you, whatever language shaped your first years, is stripped away. All chapters do something like this. The transformation from human adolescent to space marine requires a fundamental reconstruction of identity. What your chapter does differently is the layer that follows the stripping.
A Blood Angel's instructors give him Sanguinius. The primarch's face, his name, the specific story of his sacrifice at the siege of Terra, the red thirst and what it means, the black rage and what it can do, the rituals constructed around managing both. The Blood Angels are shaped not only by their primarch's personality and deeds, but by the nature of their chapter planet, Baal and its moons, whose hostile environment produces a specific kind of survivor. They receive a complete origin story and then they become it.
A Dark Angel's instructors give him Lion L. Johnson, the First Legion, Caliban. The world is destroyed, but its story is transmitted intact. Most Dark Angels don't know the deepest layer of their chapter's history, the secret that defines the inner circle, but they know the shape of what they are. Sons of a specific primarch, heirs of the First Legion, carrying a specific penance across time. The concealment they practice is laid over a foundation they do fully possess.
Your instructors stripped you. Then they gave you the fleet. They gave you the Void Father as the apex of your devotion. Below the Void Father, they gave you the Forgotten One, a title, not a name. The figure in the oldest records who dispatched your wandering ancestors into the outer darkness upon the day of exile, who gave them remit unbound, the authority to set about the traitor, the alien, and the renegade without mercy, and to harrow them in their places of strength. Whether the Forgotten One is your chapter's primarch, or your first chapter master, or both, whether the title points to one entity or two, is something the records don't settle. Your chapter does not appear to have needed it settled. The title your chapter master carries, Shade Lord, appears once in another context, attached to a commander named Arcas Fal, who operated in an exiled Raven Guard formation during the Great Crusade. Your chief librarian's title, the Pale Nomad, appears attached to an entire exiled chapter of Raven Guard Marines during the same era. Your chapter uses old Raven Guard titles, in a language that traces to something older than the chapter's recorded history, for reasons that aren't explained in the record. You carry the Coral Shield and the Void Sword, relics that, according to what can be reconstructed of the chapter's oldest lore, have been with the chapter since the very first day of exile, 10 millennia and counting. These things are present in your formation and your training. What they mean in terms of lineage and origin, your instructors didn't tell you. Not because they were withholding, because they didn't know. And they knew they didn't know. And your chapter does not tell recruits stories it can't confirm. Something about the gene seed. You noticed it during the implantation process. Your skin changed in the way you expected, the standard progression of transformation. But other changes happened alongside the standard ones. Your eyes. The particular current that activates in sustained close combat. The thing your chapter calls the blindness at its most advanced. The dangerous loss of rational function that ends careers when it reaches that level. Consigning a warrior to void exile, stripped of rank and title, sent alone into the deep dark on missions from which no return is expected. The gene seed carries markers that point, physically, in more than one direction. Black eyes are a known trait in 2 specific legions whose histories couldn't be more different. The pallor of your skin is the same. Your combat instincts in close quarters work are simultaneously predatory and patient in the manner of one lineage, and savage and direct in the manner of another. During the Badab War, when your chapter master submitted himself to the Inquisitor Legate's psychic scan, the results were accepted. The chapter was deemed loyal. What exactly the gene markers showed, whether they matched one pattern or none cleanly, or something that the word chimeric was specifically chosen in official records to describe, isn't something you were told and isn't something you need to be told to function. Your instructors taught you this. What you are is what you do. You are the mandate. You are the hull and the hunt and the silence in the corridor before the breach charge fires. That is the whole of what they gave you, and it turns out to be enough. You know the red wake the way you know the pressure of deep transit, as a constant, as a condition of operation, as something that was already there when you arrived and will remain when you are gone. His physical presence isn't subtle. Even among Astartes, who are themselves extraordinary, Tyberos is extraordinary.
larger than his void brothers in height and mass by a margin that has no formal documentation, but that every Marine who stands near him immediately understands. His armor is Terminator plate, the tactical dreadnought pattern, but modified so far from any standard configuration that the tech priests of Mars can't identify its manufacture with certainty. Dozens of brass bonding studs cover the slab plates of gray ceramite, each stud a repair, each repair a moment of damage sustained and addressed, the accumulation of centuries of combat written into the surface of the suit. A skull hangs from a chain at the giant's waist, the bone yellowing and ancient, its eye sockets as dead and soulless as the black lenses of his boar-snouted helm. His gauntlets are named Hunger and Slake. They aren't a standard pattern. They aren't a known pattern. Each combines power blades with an inner mechanism of adamantium teeth. The two impulses of a lightning claw and a chain fist merged into one weapon. And their origin is recorded nowhere the adepts of Mars can verify. The story the fleet carries, quietly, is that they were won in a duel with the Ashen Claw's master Nihat Nev during one of the fleet's difficult negotiations with that renegade force. Whether that account is accurate or is one of those stories that fills a historical gap with something plausible, you can't say. What you can say is that Hunger and Slake are as old as everything else about Tyberos, which is to say older than anyone can precisely establish. His voice, when he uses it, is a soft whisper. This never stops being striking. The largest figure in any room speaks in a register that requires attention to hear, that carries across silence without needing to fight any other noise, that conveys the promise of absolute consequence in the tone of someone simply making an observation. During the Badab War, he communicated with the loyalist commanders in exactly this manner, never raising his voice, the whisper carrying further than it had any physical right to. Other Imperial officers found it unsettling. You find it correct. Volume is for people who need to be heard over their own doubt. He leads the Red Brethren, the veterans of the First Company. He distributes those veterans among the other companies of the chapter, his eyes and ears and enforcers across the fleet, ensuring that every shoal remains oriented to the chapter's purpose, rather than drifting into whatever local priorities a long independent deployment might encourage. He has done this for as long as the chapter's records go back, which is to say, for as long as anyone currently serving can account for. The question of whether the same Tyberos has been chapter master for the full duration of the fleet's recorded history, whether Tyberos the Red Wake is one being or a title held by several, is asked within the fiction of your own chapter's history. A line from one of the fleet's documents reads, "The Reaper Lord of the Void. Is it still the Red Wake who wears that battle plate?" The question is asked. It isn't answered. And the chapter's etiquette around not answering it is itself a form of answer. An acknowledgement that the uncertainty is real, and a decision not to resolve it by assertion. You don't ask. Not because the question has been forbidden, but because you were raised in a structure that understands some questions as furniture rather than as urgencies. And this is one of them. What Tyberos is, in whatever full sense that word implies, isn't information you need to execute the mandate. He is the one fixed point in your chapter's variable history. He is where the long hunt centers. That is sufficient. When he moves through a combat zone, his weight alone is a weapon. During the Piety 5 campaign, he counterboarded a Tyranid vessel alone, moving through it in the manner of something that does not distinguish between obstacles and enemies. Those who observed him at Badab described what they saw as a blood-splattered killing machine moving almost too fast for the eye to track, yet acting with precise and deliberate intention, every strike calculated rather than the product of mere rage, cold, calculated. The whole chapter's posture, in miniature. When you see his face, the helm removed, which is rare, what is there is a corpse-white structure with half the bones of the face exposed in a bloodless grimace, the eyes a soulless, depthless black.
It isn't the face of something that was recently human. You don't find this alarming. You look in a reflective surface and you see pale skin and black eyes and the beginning of what will become denticles in time. You are made of the same material. You simply haven't been at it as long. You have surfaced before. You will surface again. The deployment pattern is regular enough that it has a shape, if not a schedule. The fleet moves through the outer void, prosecuting the mandate, and periodically, the mandate delivers it back towards settled Imperial space. A threat that requires proximity. A red tide that the chapter's numbers require. A summons that can't be ignored. When this happens, the fleet appears at the edge of a war zone with what other Imperial forces consistently describe, in every account that survives contact with your chapter, as no warning. No warning. The phrase appears in accounts of your arrival at the Badab War in 910 M41, when the fleet presented itself at the edge of the Golgothan wastes with 6 companies, unlooked for by either side. Both loyalists and secessionists registered alarm. An unidentified, fire-blackened strike cruiser identified itself with ancient Imperial authorization codes, issued by High Lords of Terra long dead, affirming rights and titles that predated the entire conflict by centuries. Tyberos presented himself for a psychic scan. The Inquisitor Legate vouched for the chapter. Lord Commander Carib Culn of the Red Scorpions accepted the Carcharodons into his line of battle, though he remained wary of their long deviation from the Codex Astartes, of their methods, of what exactly they were. The Fire Angels eventually left the theater. They couldn't continue watching what the chapter did. The systematic annihilation of the Endymion cluster's worlds. The forced fighting to the death among populations harvested for recruits. The sabotage of Badab Primaris's reactor cores that triggered tectonic upheaval and destroyed the planet. The Fire Angels made a moral assessment and acted on it. The chapter didn't moderate its methods, and didn't appear to expect them to. Nihat Nev, master of the Ashen Claws, that renegade void fleet whose history intertwines with yours across centuries of deals and confrontations, had a single word for your kind that filtered back through the record. Mutt. He was trying to destabilize something. He failed, because your chapter does not maintain its sense of itself through others' approval. But something in that contempt is worth holding up. Those you save view you as monsters.
The Blood Angels at Midian, during the 7th Black Crusade in 811 M37, their line was collapsing under cornate berserkers, and a gray-clad fleet appeared from nowhere, fell upon the pursuers with a brutality that unsettled even the sons of Sanguinius, and turned the engagement. The Blood Angels survived. The Carcharodons vanished. At the memorial built afterward, on the crypt world of Hypacidus, the Blood Angels received the named tributes and the commemorated history. The Carcharodons receive statues with featureless discs of black obsidian where faces should be. No name, no chapter mark, just black stone where an identity would have been. Your chapter built nothing to commemorate that engagement. It does not build commemorations. It does not seek recognition from the parties it aids or the spaces it operates through. Imperial space isn't where your legacy is stored. Your legacy is the mandate, still running, 10 millennia deep, in the outer dark where nobody is watching. At the Badab War's end, the fleet returned one last time to the Endymion cluster, ransacked the Mantis warriors' hidden armories of supplies and war material, and took a generation of recruits from the Tranquility system. Then, the last known sighting placed you tacking course through the warp, ascending above the galactic plane, vanishing back into the blackness of the outer void. That is always the last sighting. The void takes you back, and you let it. Other chapters carry wounds. The Blood Angels carry the red thirst and the black rage, structural conditions of their gene seed, a psychic echo of their primarch's death that can override rational function in the deepest moments of combat. They know exactly what this is. They have rituals around it, therapies, a whole chapter-wide practice of management that is inseparable from what it means to be a blood angel. The wound has a name and a genealogy, and a set of responses built for it over millennia. You have the blindness, the condition that takes hold when the predatory current slides past the point of management, the madness, in its final form, that strips a warrior of rank and title and sends him alone into the void as a void exile, on missions from which no return is expected. You have lived your entire career without reaching that threshold. You manage the current. This is also part of your training, but you don't grieve it. You don't lie awake wondering what you would be if your gene seed were different. You don't spend contemplative hours tracing the lineage backward, trying to establish which primarch's blood runs in your modified physiology and what that primarch's failures mean for your own character. The Blood Angels must manage the inheritance of Sanguinius's death as a daily practice. You manage the inheritance of a gene seed whose full genealogy you weren't given, and you manage it by being exactly what your training made you. The not knowing of the genealogy is simply not a variable in that management. Other chapters derive their cohesion from shared origin, from knowing together that they are the sons of one specific figure who lived a specific life and made specific choices whose consequences they now carry. That shared knowing is load-bearing. It holds the chapter's identity together across geography and time. Your chapter derives its cohesion from shared function. You are all doing the same thing, in the same place, under the same command, and you have been doing it for 10,000 years, and the function does not require origin to remain coherent. What you have instead of a primarch's name, the Forgotten One, which isn't a name but a kind of negative space, the shape of someone whose name was either lost or set aside, whose only recorded designation is defined by the setting aside.
What you have instead of a homeworld's culture, the culture the fleet built in the absence of a homeworld, drawing from something deep in the wandering ancestors' inheritance. The tattoos, the titles, the tapu, the language of the void, maintained and deepened across 10 millennia of self-sufficient operation. What you have instead of a founding myth is the day of exile and the mandate and the long hunt that is still ongoing. Your battle cry, from the void we come, darkness there, and nothing more. Carried by your chaplains longer than anyone can establish. The darkness there, and nothing more. An acknowledgement, and a location, and a statement of what greets questions asked into the deep dark. Not an answer, not nothing, just the darkness, acknowledged, and nothing more beyond it. Your chapter didn't adopt this as a lament. It adopted it as a coordinate. Here is where we are. Here is what it is. We are going in. Nahat Nev is right that those you save view you as monsters. You didn't surface into Imperial space to be loved. His contempt assumes that the chapter wanted something else and failed to have it, but that assumes the alternative was ever possible, and the alternative has never been presented by anyone who could actually offer it.
Your chapter was dispatched into the outer dark with a mandate and has prosecuted that mandate across 10,000 years. The alternative would have required someone to call the fleet home, to tell them what they were, to give them the shore they were never given. Nobody came. So the fleet built what it has: the hull, the cold, the Void Father's mandate, and the Red Wake. These aren't consolation prizes. They are the chapter. The questions exist. The founding is unrecorded, not missing in the sense that someone lost the file, but unrecorded in the sense that the oldest references simply don't contain the information.
A text from late M35, the Mythos Angelica Mortis, describes a chapter called the Carcharodon Astra being dispatched into the outer darkness on an endless voyage. That text is itself derived from an older work now lost, dating back to an era surrounding the Astropath Wars of M32, a period of Imperial history so thoroughly purged from the record that less is known of it than of the Horus heresy. Whatever happened in that era, whatever convulsion produced your chapter, or deployed it, or had it already deployed from some earlier moment, isn't accessible through surviving documents. The gene seed carries markers that point in multiple directions.
Your physical traits, the pale skin, the liquid black eyes that a rogue trader named Basil Herothis described as blank black eyes when he encountered one of your kind's commanders on the world of Loth during the Angevin Crusade, match two entirely different legions, which shouldn't be possible if the gene seed is simply one lineage expressing its standard mutations. The official position, as recorded in canonical Imperial sources, is this: Ravengard, allegedly. Possibly chimeric. The word possibly is doing significant work there, and your chapter is aware that it is doing significant work there, and your chapter does not go beyond it. Tyberos' age isn't established in any record. The armor predates the documentation of its current occupant. The question of whether it's still the Red Wake who wears that battle plate was asked within the fiction of your own chapter's history by someone looking at the suit and genuinely not knowing. The chapter didn't provide an answer, and the question wasn't pressed.
There is a relic called the Void Glass, an artifact given, according to your oldest lore, to the Forgotten One by the Emperor himself, to guard at all costs. What the Void Glass is and what it does, and why the Emperor specifically placed it in the Forgotten One's keeping rather than entrusting it to a more established figure of the time, isn't recorded. The relic exists. Its purpose remains open. The dreadnought Itako rests in the White Maw's hold in a Contemptor chassis, heresy era or older. Who exactly he was in life, how he ended up interred in that particular hall, in that particular company, with no surviving record of the circumstances, is a lost mystery of the chapter. He fights when called upon. He does not explain himself. He has been this way for as long as the Third Company's records exist, and the records don't extend to a time before he was already present.
Scholars outside the chapter ask about these things with great urgency.
They have assembled the physical traits, the old equipment. Squads in Red Tive carried a Volkite caliver, a weapon of such rarity in the 41st millennium that its presence implies access to a supply chain that shouldn't exist. The Ravengard titles, the chimeric gene markers, and generated theories. Ravengard descent, Night Lord's descent, based on the physical traits, which is the uncomfortable option because Night Lord's gene seed carries a specific taint toward chaos that would make a loyal chapter carrying it a remarkable and troubling proposition. World Eater's descent, based on the combat doctrine, which requires positing a loyalist remnant from one of the most thoroughly corrupted legions. Some combination of these. None of these theories are resolved. Several of them have textual hooks in actual Imperial records. None of them can be confirmed. You are aware these theories exist.
You are aware that people outside the fleet spend careers pursuing them.
A Night Lord named Amun Kal, fighting against your chapter at Zartak, noticed it too, that the Carcharodons' fighting style resembled the Night Lord's own doctrines, but where the Night Lords delighted in the terror they caused, the Grey Warriors seemed to be without any emotions at all. That observation, from a practitioner of terror warfare who spent his career using psychological dominance as a weapon, is one of the more precise external descriptions of what your chapter is. You carry all of this the way you carry your armor. It's weight, but not burden. A burden is something you carry that you wish you weren't carrying. Weight is simply mass, and mass is what you are made of. And now you step back out. The fleet releases you. The cold lets go. You are yourself again, and you can feel it already. The thing you carried out of the dark with you. The itch. All those questions, still open.
What is sealed in the compartments, the chapter has never explained. How old the Red Wake actually is. Whether Tyberos is a name or a title worn by more than one being across 10 millennia of command. Whether the armor knows something its current occupant does not acknowledge. What the Carcharodons were before they were Carcharodons, whose sons they really are. What founding was left unrecorded. Why the gene seed presents the markers it presents when a single clean lineage should present fewer contradictions. The void glass, and what the Emperor said when he gave it to the Forgotten One. Itako, in his heresy-era hall, and the name he no longer answers to. You want those answered. Sitting here, in your own skin, you want it the way you want the end of a held breath. That want is human, and it's yours, and there is nothing wrong with it. But hold it up against the 35 minutes you just lived, because a Carcharodon does not have that itch. A Carcharodon was raised.
Deliberately, or because the chapter has operated this way long enough that deliberate and accidental became the same thing, in a formation that refused to hand him a comforting story it couldn't prove. And so he grew up with the gaps where other Marines have a home world and a primarch and a history, and the gaps didn't become wounds. They became the water. They became the thing that made him, unmoored, undistracted, unsentimental, fixed on the fleet and the cold and the next war and the Red Wake, and free of the one burden you are feeling right now, the need to know. That is the difference the whole thing was about, not the answers, the relationship to their absence. You want the mystery solved. A Carcharodon was built to carry it forever and never once feel the weight. The questions stay open. They were always going to stay open.
And now you know what it costs, and what it gives. To be the kind of thing that can breathe down there in the dark, where the answers are, and never need to come up for them.
Subscribe for more stories like this.